Hello, Align fam. I know you guys have always wanted to get a prep for the topics of the Align experience so you guys have a sense of what's happening and get excited about it and just know what you're going to be walking into. So I think a lot of you already know this, but especially this fifth anniversary, these topics have been in the making for the last 6 months because I really wanted to aggregate what are the most important challenges and desires and wishes that you guys are all collectively going through. So I'm super excited. We finally have Rob to join us. Rob, welcome aboard.
Hi, good to see you, Jessica. Thank you.
Of course. And just so people understand why I'm so excited, I think you've been to the third one, Align Experience this year. And just like from our conversations, you've had your own personal journey when it comes to dating, when it comes to really defining what masculinity means to you. So I would love for you to just first start off like tell us a little bit about your journey. And the topic we're going to discuss with you is true masculinity, what that means. Let's redefine that, and how we can vet and create genuine relationships. So let's start off with your journey.
Journey in dating, yeah? Journey
Yeah.
in relationship.
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I'm a late bloomer for sure. And I don't think that's circumstantial. I think I'm a late bloomer because I was figuring it out like everyone else. And, I've been single for a long time. I had relationships. I was actually engaged, never married. And there was a lot of relationships along the way, right? Some of them lasted a week. Well, some of them lasted a night, some of them lasted a week, some of them lasted months, some of them lasted years. But the pattern was pretty much the same, which is I was not really authentically myself in any of those relationships. And it took me a long time, about 40 years, to realize that there was something within me that wasn't truly authentic, right? So I had a lot of broken hearts. I never fell in love, and no one's ever broken up with me. So I never really had a broken heart on the receiving end. But I hurt a lot of women, a lot. And it became a thing where I hated hurting women so much that sometimes I would just avoid relationships for years. And I just realized that I wasn't able to really give myself fully and I wasn't able to receive fully. There was like this numbness. There wasn't really true love being generated, right? Even if the woman wanted to love me, I'd put my guard up. And my love was the love that I gave was sort of stifled or contingent, right? Or conditional. I wasn't really in my heart. But of course, I didn't want to be alone. So I kept trying to find connection. And I did. I found connection on the level that I was able to connect.
Mm-hmm.
So here I am. And then at 40, I kind of went on this journey of really trying to understand why am I stuck in these patterns? Why is the same thing being shown? And almost felt karmic, if you will. And then I realized that, of course, the common denominator is me. And in the moment, I could look at the woman and say she was not this or she was too much that. But they were all incredible and they were all perfect in their own right. I just wasn't able to meet them fully, right? I wasn't allowing myself to be seen. I wasn't allowing myself to be felt. And therefore, this energy of love that's meant to rejuvenate, revitalize us, right? It just, it was buffering.
Yeah. No, I'm super powerful. And thank you, obviously, for sharing that, but also being so self-aware that you were hurting so many women. And in a way, you even like try to cage yourself so you don't hurt anymore. Right. So as much as you thought you had your Playboy stage, right, it just goes to show that you can have a Playboy who still has a heart, but he's just figuring it out and he hasn't figured it out yet. Right. So yeah, I'm sure you sharing that story will get a lot of women to maybe reflect on their relationships as well if they're dating someone like that, right? Like maybe he hasn't necessarily figured out his authentic self yet, which is totally fine. We're all on a journey. With that said, we've talked about training ourselves to instead of dating with our eyes and being very superficial and the common things are a woman's beauty, a man's wallet or his power, right? So and you talk about dating with your heart and your soul. So let's touch a little bit about that because we will discuss a little bit further in person on January 25th.
Sure. Well, like I said, I only speak from experience. And, I was trying to find the perfect person, the perfect woman. And of course, a lot of that was just superficial at the time. And man, it's an impossible thing to live up to,
Mm,
right? It's impossible. And even when you find it, because trust me, I pushed the envelope. I've dated some of the most beautiful women that I've even seen.
mm,
And it still didn't matter because truthfully, I was sort of looking in the wrong place.
yep,
Beauty matters, security matters. We want to be attracted. There's certain biological things within us.
yep.
But what I'm seeing though is people like myself, we're taking it and magnifying it.
Hmm.
They were making it the thing
Hmm.
versus a component of the overall attraction, a piece of the pie.
Hmm.
We're making it the pie, right? Is she a perfect 10? Is he making $500,000 a year? Is he 6'4"? Whatever. The things that
Yeah.
are at the end of the day, if you looked at a long-term relationship and you looked at the components for love, they're small pieces of the pie.
Yeah.
And the values of the heart are the things that sustain the troubles and challenges of life.
Mm.
Troubles and challenges of maybe creating a family if that's what you want, of being in a 30, 40. My parents are married 56 years.
Wow.
You
Yeah.
think my mother's going, oh man, if it wasn't for your father's height, yeah. Or yo, your mother had a great ass when we were young.
Yeah.
I'm sure they noticed.
Right.
I'm not saying that they didn't notice
Yeah.
because that's the thing that just kind of grabs us and tickles us a little bit.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the life that they live together, the experiences that they've been through together,
Mm.
and the character and the values that they have in their heart is what got them through that and brought them closer together. So what happens is when we build a foundation on the superficial, it's only a matter of time when those superficial things fade away, let's
Yeah.
say, or become less important or less interesting, right? And what happens? The foundation is very weak. And then what happened to me is I started sort of self-loathing
Mm.
because of it, because I'm like, what's wrong with me? I'm objectifying women.
Yeah.
I don't even see them as human. And here I am alone again, another broken relationship. She's not enough. She's not enough. She's not enough. Who's not enough? Maybe I'm not worth, don't feel worthy. Maybe this is me protecting myself, putting all this pressure on this woman to look a certain way
Hmm.
because truthfully, I can't hold it. I can't hold her femininity. My masculinity is not strong enough. So therefore, I'm going to keep pushing her away. You see?
Yeah.
Because true healthy masculinity sees the woman in her fullness, in her beauty, in her ugliness, in her truth, in her wild nature, in her unpredictable emotions, in her sacred heart that just wants to love since she's a little girl, that wants to nurture, that wants to maybe be a wife, that maybe wants to be a mother, that maybe loves God if you're spiritual. And when you look in her eyes, not at her breasts, not at her butt, in
Yeah.
her eyes, you'll see God. You'll see the universe within her. And a man that could sit there and hold that eye contact and see her for all of her beauty, her whole life and the life before her and her ancestors. See, these are matters of the soul, Jessica. Like, this is not, you see how we quickly went from the superficial to a very deep place? We have to train ourselves to remember that we're only here for a short time. What are you really going for? Are
Yeah.
you going for a wallet? Or are you going for the one only thing that really matters in this lifetime, which is true love? And then we have to ask ourselves, what does true love mean? What defines true love for you? Because I guarantee if you really pose that question to yourself, you're going to very quickly move beyond the superficial.
Mhm.
And if you look at your parents' relationship, maybe if it's healthy, your grandparents' relationship, and further back, those superficial things become less important.
Yeah.
So we're living in a modern materialistic world where it's easy to get conditioned, and those things matter a little. I'm not saying they don't matter. But if that's the top of our priority list when we're looking for love, we might find ourselves disappointed in a couple of years.
100%. You said once, and I think it's such a beautiful quote, that a lot of us we have all this criteria, but it has nothing to do with love. And it reminds me of when I talk to and coach a lot of men and women, I'm like, given our apps, right? Given the illusion of abundance, it's an illusion, right?
Mm.
Everyone's building a bear like they're building a Ken doll or building a Barbie. Like I like this guy's like like height, but I like his wallet and I like his face. Like you can't that does not exist, right? That's it's an illusion. You can't pick the best parts of someone and also if that person existed. Perfection is a very lonely place because it's not real and it's very hard to relate with to people who even try to pretend to be perfect, right? And it's like once you have someone who's so perfect, I'm sure to your point, we've all dated people who are, on paper or what society deems as the most beautiful people and, we would be so lucky to have someone that's like that as our partner. But then you give it some time and you're like, there's nothing deeper here that we have besides how you look. And it's not his or her fault. It's because we only vetted for their beauty and we never gone a little bit deeper. So I'm definitely really excited, especially from your perspective and your lens, given your journey from being more of a playboy and now recovered from that or on a recovering stage, as we're honestly saying, because I think it'll be helpful for people to understand how to vet, what to really look for, and what really matters. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah.
And for those that are coming that are in relationships, either new budding relationships or long-term marriages, right? We always hear, how to keep the spark alive, and I'm always telling people like it's not just about sex at all, right? And you mentioned it's intimacy. So you want to talk a little bit about how do we keep the spark alive, give some people, the audience, like an idea of what to expect when they're coming on January 25th.
Yeah, I mean, sex comes with a lot of baggage for most of us. Let's be real. In this Western society, right? Like we all carry some level of dysfunction around our
Yeah.
sexuality, and that's okay, right? It's almost impossible not to, right? Because even if like your parents were like try to like teach you a completely untouched version of sex, even that would have repercussions. So like it just, and the reason for that, I believe, is because it's such a sacred act.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know it's the most vulnerable thing that you could do with your body and with someone else's body. And a lot of us don't treat it sacred, but eventually we realize that holding it not sacred will wither our soul. That's usually what I've noticed in the world is like we could pretend it's not sacred, but eventually we're going to realize it is. And we're going to change the course because it's an intimate thing and it's vulnerable and it requires a certain level of intimacy with ourselves and with another human being. And the closest that we're going to ever get to God, if that's what you believe in, is through the communion with someone that you love
Mm-hmm.
in mutual orgasm.
Yeah.
The closest we'll get. So it's a powerful energy that runs through us, and therefore a powerful energy that we can share with another. So when we're having complications with it within relationship, the best thing to do is slow down and take a step back, right?
Yeah.
Because this powerful force that all of a sudden might become absent in your relationship, if we force our way through it, it's just going to make things more uncomfortable, right? So we have to honor everyone's relationship with their own sexuality and the flow of the sex within the relationship. And the best way to do that is just to not make it a big deal. Because I know men that like if they don't get sex for 2 weeks, they tear the house apart, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I know women that are like, oh, there must be a problem in our relationship because Gary hasn't made a move on me in 3 weeks. And it's like, maybe that could be true, but the reality is like Life happens.
Yeah.
And if we could look at that and say, you know what our relationship needs right now? Intimacy. What does that mean? Sex? No, not always. It might mean a candlelight conversation in bed. Talk about the relationship, how you're doing together, what's going on, how you feeling, right? It might be dressing up for each other and going out to dinner, right? It might be just an honest, truthful conversation with your partner. It might be sex without having sex, right? Like just making out or maybe just foreplay, whatever it is. We put so much pressure on this, on intercourse. And whether you're single or you're in a relationship, you can say what you want, but sex usually dictates almost our every move.
Mm,
There's a lot of weight on it, and our value is placed on it, like I said earlier. So to de-emphasize it a little bit and take a step back and say, what does my partner actually need right now to reignite that flame that maybe we lost temporarily
mm,
is beautiful. And I think the more that men could read women, because I
mm.
think we have a hard time reading women, right?
Yeah.
Like it's never about the dishes,
Yeah.
so to speak. The more we could read their body language and then we could read their behavior because they say things without you, when you ladies say things without saying things.
Hmm. Yeah.
Men need to become more aware of the language of the feminine because it's wild and it's unpredictable sometimes and it's emotional
Hmm.
and it's moon cycles sometimes that affect it. And we just have to be able to get in that pocket and say, here she goes. Okay. What is she saying? What does she need? Let me hug her. Let me kiss her. Let me spank her on the butt. Let me kiss her on the cheek. Let me sit down with her and talk to her. Let me not be so aggressive tonight sexually. Let me cuddle with her. Right. We need to be the master of that. And it is nice when you give us cues and
Yeah.
it's not always so subtle. But the intimacy is beautiful because it just allows us to slow down and take a step back and connect. And sometimes that's just eye gazing, and sometimes that's just cuddling, and sometimes that's just a conversation, and that will lead
Hmm.
to sex being rejuvenated most of the time.
Hmm. Um, I love and appreciate how you say, hey, we should, kind of pick up the cues that women give us, and they show us sometimes what's bit by what's not spoken, even in silence or even from our body language we need. But I would like to encourage the women that we also need to be a little bit more straightforward and say things you mean. And
Yes.
how many times, and I used to say this with my girlfriends, how many times do women say, like, I'm fine and they're not fine, right? Or say things they don't actually mean. And it's completely confusing to people, especially men who are hardwired to be A to B, like logical, linear thinking, right? So while, yes, I think men can definitely be a little bit more sensitive to our mood swings and, our energy and how we show up. And it's the wildness that you guys fall for, right? Like there's a reason that you're attracted to the feminine because we're wild, because we're free, because we give you the emotions that you normally wouldn't feel on your own, right? But I think women can also step up to just be honest. Like if you're not feeling good about something, say it, right? Communicate it and not, create like a scavenger hunt for the men because it's actually harder for you to get what you want anyway. So make
Right.
it easier for both of you, you know? But you mentioned a few things that wanted to echo. One is there's something that Esther Perel, who's a relationship and sex therapist, would say, and I think it's so beautiful. Sex is not something you do, it's a place you go. And it's a place where, to your point, it's so vulnerable and it's like your fantasy land. It's a place that you should be able to feel safe with your partner. You could be free to be whoever you want, right? You cannot use your brain for the time being and just be in the moment and really be in your body. And so there's something else she always says: foreplay begins at the end of an orgasm. So the moment you orgasm, we start foreplay, right? Like it's the little things that you're doing for her, to your point, like dressing up for each other, texting each other, that's really building it up so that when the main act actually comes, there's so much intimacy already built in. You're going to have a much more enjoyable, magical, I would say, sexual experience because there's so much that you already felt about each other. And they've done a lot of studies where people think if you fix the sex, you'll fix the relationship. It's actually not, there's no relationship in that way. However, If you fix the emotions and the problems in the relationship for each other, the emotional issues, sex generally gets better, which shows you in a relationship, sex is not an act, it's really an experience together,
I love that. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I love the foreplay happens after sex. So true. Like
right?
everything we say, everything we do
Mhm.
is an energetic vibration that either is an act of love or is a maybe an act of ignorance, right? So how do we speak to each other? How do we communicate? It's really super important. And look, I'll just say it, like we got to bring romance back.
Thank you. Yes.
Let's bring romance back. And look, men could take the lead on that because that's how it's always been. And women need to reciprocate. But we got to court each other and date each other throughout a relationship because you mentioned Esther Perel. Another thing she says is, which I really like, is uh, you'll date many people throughout your lifetime. Sometimes
Mhm.
the person in your relationship, meaning different iterations of the same person. The
Yeah.
relationship is always changing and shifting, and who's evolving and who's not, and who's this. And so we have to adapt and we have to adjust. But love wins.
Yeah.
And romance is just a derivative of love. It's just that it's the act of love.
Yeah. 100%. And I think for the women, right, maybe let's expand beyond fancy dinners and gifts as romance, right? Because we've been brainwashed to think, again, there's nothing wrong with any of us. We were born perfect, perfect in our own unique way. And it's really consumerism and social media and all these things trying to sell us something to tell us there's something wrong with us so they can make money out of us, right? So there's nothing wrong with you. Let's start there, right? And when you look at social media saying, oh, if he loves you, he'd buy you this, he'd buy you that, he'd take you here, take you there, right? What is real? Does that really romance? Like, how hard is it, right, to someone to take you to dinner? How hard is it for someone to like buy you those shoes? Like, you can get everything online now with, especially with Amazon, like things come within 2 days, right? But it takes effort and time to make you coffee in the morning. It takes you effort and time to take you out on a beautiful hike with each other. It gives you time to plan out a very thoughtful date, right? Or even the small little moments, eye gazing, right? I always say this that the most romantic moments in my personal life were never these fancy dinners and trips. It's those little like nameless moments, probably eye gazing or hugging, something so simple that I will never forget. And it was never about money, right? And for men, I'm sure it wasn't like dating and hooking up with the hottest girl that was the most memorable, right? So, Rob, is there a moment that you can recall, or even like moments where it's like it was the most romantic thing for you, but it's not what society would assume
Yeah.
is
I
romantic?
remember with my ex-fiance, I had a record player in my Brooklyn apartment,
Hmm.
and we would just play like songs from like the 40s and 50s on the record player, like when songs were actually about love and not about sex,
Right.
there was a different vibration in that music. And we would just slow dance in my living room there. I remember like there'd be like a snowstorm outside and we'd play that music and we would just dance, slow dance. And look, as corny as it sounds, like in that moment, it's just you and her.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
You're the center of the universe in that moment.
Yeah.
So the stuff that you're talking about, I've seen people at beautiful restaurants, dinners, fighting.
Yeah.
You can tell disgusted with each other. It means nothing. And money, I have friends that do this. They treat these women like princesses,
Mhm.
but like there's no substance behind the
Yeah.
gesture.
Hmm.
There's
Yeah.
no love, there's no foundation, so it really doesn't matter. So the moments that substance is built are in the moments that you and I are talking about.
Yeah.
True romance, true connections, it's just you and her or whatever your sexual preferences. It's you and your partner,
Yeah.
right?
100%.
And that's beautiful. And we have to bring that back and get comfortable in those moments,
Mm, yeah. Because and just like you mentioned, you had your journey, right? Like when I had my journey and I became less superficial when I'm dating, it was really, I started to understand why it was always so hard to hold eye contact with men.
Mm.
because I was never comfortable with that level of intimacy. That I'm like, wait a minute, this is way too much. Stop looking into my soul, right? So that's actually a really good test. I'm glad you brought it up. Like, can you hold eyes with someone? It's a good test to see how intimately you met yourself and you're comfortable with yourself, but also if you genuinely have feelings for someone. Because if you don't, it's really awkward when someone tries to stare into your eyes. You're like, I want nothing to do with this, you know?
Right.
Like, oh God, like I'm not ready for this. Um, yeah, so these are just the last thing we're definitely going to talk about is laws of the universe. So I know a lot of you that come are like very obviously career focused. You're coming to be the best version of yourself, and you're very much like, I don't believe it until I see it mindset. So we're going to talk about laws of the universe, which is rooted in physics. Rob, do you want to share just kind of like the five that we're going to talk about and maybe like one sentence or one blip about it?
Yeah. I believe there's 12, but the reason
Oh,
why I think it's important to talk about is to your point, right? We all have different relationships with spirituality. And mine is pretty in depth. I've gone really, really far on the journey. And I don't think it's something to impose on another person,
mhm.
right? To talk about, your version of God or whatever.
Yep.
So the laws of the universe are just basically quantum physics. These are the mechanics that the universe is built on. These are proven theories. And as above, so below. So whatever's happening on a cosmic level, we're part of those cosmos.
Mhm.
So it affects us here on Earth, right? So the law of polarity, for example, like a lot of men are like, I want a feminine woman, or a lot of women are like, I want a masculine man. And it's like, okay, but understand the law, polarity, meaning opposite magnetic forces attract. The more opposite they are, the more they come together. That's polarity, right? So a super masculine man will attract a super feminine woman. A non-masculine man who hasn't gotten comfortable in his masculinity that says he wants a feminine woman won't be able to attract her because it's not polarizing enough. See? So that's why I always tell people when they tell me things like, I want a really masculine man. It's like, well, what energy are you putting out into the world? When you show up to the restaurant, when you show up to the bar, when you show up to wherever to meet somebody, to the social outing, are you in your feminine? Have you cultivated that or preserved that, however you want to look at it, so that that polarity can happen? That's just an example,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
We could talk about the law of reciprocity, right? What we give, we get back. The more we give, the more we get. A simple example of that would be like, hey, on Thanksgiving, I came to your house and I dropped off a pumpkin pie just because it was a nice thing to do.
Yeah.
Immediately, you're going, that was such a nice gesture. And now I'm in your queue to do something back,
Mhm.
right? Not because you feel obligated, but because you want to, because it was just
Right.
such a nice thing. And it's the same thing in relationships. It goes back to our previous conversation. The more you give, the more you get back. The more love you give, the more energetic exchange that you give, the more it will come back. And it becomes like a balloon that we're just bouncing back. We're not letting it hit the ground, right? We're playing the game. When I withhold myself and I withhold my love, what are you going to do?
Withhold.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
So this is what's happening on a cosmic universal level, right? It's the same thing with the law of attraction. Everybody wants something, but
Mhm.
we're not attracting what we want, we're attracting what we are,
Mhm.
right? So this is all things that we could play with, like these rules, these laws that are absolutely proven. And if we want to call that God or we want to call that spiritual, we can. But to ignore the unseen, which is basically what we're talking about here,
Yeah.
right? Is a bad philosophy. So we take inventory. We see how we're showing up energetically, not just in our physical body, but our subtle body.
Yeah.
And we take inventory of our emotions and we take inventory of our actions in the world on a day-to-day basis. And the more that we come from this place of positivity, the law of assumption, the more we come from this place of giving, the law of reciprocity, this way of being in our full power, the law of attraction,
Yeah.
more the things that we want will actually begin to orbit around us,
100%.
right? So this is the spiritual component.
100%. It's so interesting because if you think about people who are not spiritual, not religious, and you don't need to be, um, if you look at science, most iconic scientists, right? Like Einstein, Tesla, for example, Nikola Tesla, all their teachings were rooted in spirituality to the point where there's no way they would have the heart to continue discovering these elements for humanity if they didn't have faith, because there was no proof. They discovered it, right? So it's actually fascinating. If you think about science, science really requires a lot of faith until
Yes.
it's proven and rooted. Now it's a fact and it's true, right? So it's actually kind of ironic in that way. Yeah, one thing I want to highlight about the laws of the universe and like the physics that we just discussed is, for example, even like law of I can't speak English.
Reciprocity.
There you go. That one. I cannot speak today. Even that law, right? I think even for me, I sometimes get stuck. I'm like, well, I've given so much to this one person. I feel like I'm taking an advantage of. At some point, I need to cut off. What I've kind of learned is that where you give is not always how you're going to get back.
Right.
That is huge, right? Because sometimes like we are so stuck on, well, I gave it to Jen and Jen needs to give it back. Like, no, gave it to Jen. Jen probably gave the energy to someone else. That one, someone else heard something about me and that came back to me. So it's like be more open. Even when like there are times when you're genuinely got screwed over, just remember everything is happening for you. Like if it's not, if you didn't need that lesson or that thing to happen, it wouldn't happen in your life. So I always
Mhm.
like look at it and say, what can you take out of this? Like I'm always like, play an alchemist, right? Like how can you take whatever's thrown at you and make it to your benefit? Because it's in your life, you might as well transform it, right? So yeah, I think I'm really excited for you to walk people through the laws, examples of it, how it plays out in your love life. Because I think once people understand these, again, laws of physics, you'll see how you're actually holding yourself back in terms of your mindset, your actions. Also, if you're always looking at history, like, for example, we talked about this, like, I don't want to date a cheap guy, right? If you're constantly looking in the back, being like, well, I've dated a cheap guy before, I don't want it before. You're so scared of that thing. You're constantly looking for cheap guys. You actually end up attracting a cheap guy, right?
Mhm.
Versus if you say, like, I want to look for someone who's generous. I want to find a man who's generous with his time just as I am with him, right? That's a very different energy than being like, I don't want this thing. The universe
Right.
doesn't know don'ts. It just knows what you focus on. So if you say, I don't want cheap, they just think, oh, cheap. Let's send her another cheap man. She wants more, you know? So,
Right.
yeah, excited to kind of dive in with everyone into those topics. But is there anything else, Rob, before we wrap up, that you want to share that you're excited about on January 25th? Anything that we should expect from you or get excited about?
Yeah, I would ask everybody to come in with an open mind,
Mm,
right?
yes.
Like anytime I do something like this, I want to create a safe container.
Hmm.
Like a really just a trusted, like just no bullshit. Like you know what I mean? Like we're here to talk and we're here to get real. And I think if we do that, then everything will flow
Yeah.
beautifully, right? And then we'll be able to be a mirror of reflections for each other because the truth is we're all trying to figure it out. We're spinning on the rock in the middle of space. Like we're all trying to figure it out. We all basically want the same thing.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of this. So we're all searching for love and connection and community and devotion and trust, right? Um, so it's really just about how do we get there,
100%.
right? It's
100%.
trust. It is trust. It is surrender, and it's also self-reflection.
Yep.
The self-reflection piece, the surrender is hard for a lot of people, but the self-reflection, self-inventory, are my thoughts healthy? Are my emotions healthy? Are my actions healthy? Am I generalizing all men? Am I dating my toxic father? Like these are important things just to look at to say, because once you go, I'm in alignment,
Mm,
then like all you really got to do is surrender. It's not, this is what I learned. Once you're in alignment, then you're on the right path, and it might be a more narrow path. There might be not be as many men there or as many women there, right? Which is a good thing.
yeah. It's a good thing.
It's the narrow path, and you go, hey, it's kind of quiet, but now the men and the women become more high quality.
Yes.
And eventually you're like, there it is. Oh shit. I didn't have to think about that one. It
Hmm.
was almost immediate. I knew.
Yep.
And it wasn't about this, that, or the other bullshit that we told ourselves for years and years and years.
Yep.
Because your soul recognized their soul.
Mm, love that. Yeah, to your point about being open mind. Also, I would say naturally open heart with it. And I say this because this is the fifth one. I've seen people, there's a reason why we don't do these sessions all together in a big group and I break you guys up. It's because you create intimacy for you guys to open up. And the number of people that looked at a guy differently or a woman differently because she opened up. And I've literally had people say to me, Jess, I saw Rob so differently in that light. I've never seen that side of him before. I thought he was ABC. I thought he was XYZ, but he turned out to be much better. The number of times I get hear that, so I'm like, do yourself a favor, especially you're here to make genuine connections. Be vulnerable in those moments because you're going to start actually creating more attraction with people in the room because they actually get to see you for your heart and not this armor that we put on to protect ourselves from the very thing we actually want, which is love. So I'm
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
excited, Rob. Cannot wait. Until then, be well and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Jessica. Can't
Of
wait.
course. Bye, Rob.